We are all suffering under the same oppressor, the white man.
Whites have persecuted and oppressed people of color for hundreds of years.
It is sobering for us as white people to talk together about what it really costs to maintain such a system of division and exploitation in our society.
Since people of color do not have the institutions to empower their prejudices, they cannot be racist. Make a commitment to broaden your perspectives beyond your narrow, Eurocentric world. The least you can do as a white person is to get to know another culture.
We must be aware of how power holders oppressed all people of color to shape the country as they wanted it. Racism is one of several systems of oppression. Others are class, sexism, heterosexism, the institutionalized primacy of Christianity, and able-bodyism. These systems work toward a common goal: to maintain power and control in the hands of wealthy, white, heterosexual, Christian, able-bodied men.
You may think that these statements represent a kind of radical, racist philosophy discussed only among a small group of people on the fringes of mainstream society. But you would be wrong. Remarkably, every one of these statements has been taken from multicultural training materials for teachers in the public education system. That's right. These racist ideologies are not only being spread with your tax dollars, but they are also informing what your children are being taught in the classroom. In the state of Wisconsin, the Department of Public Instruction, or DPI, is responsible for providing direction and technical assistance for public elementary and secondary education. To achieve these ends, it employs over 600 people and requires over $4 billion tax dollars per year, tax dollars in addition to the property taxes levied by local school districts. The department is also charged with offering professional guidance and counseling for administrators and staff and improving curriculum and school operations. In 2009, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Dr. Tony Evers, launched a program called Create Wisconsin with a seemingly laudable mission to help students inappropriately labeled as special education. The theory is that a disproportionate amount of minority students are labeled special education because they are so far behind their peers academically. Christy Lacroix has been a teacher in the state of Wisconsin for 15 years and has taught students in both general education and special education programs.
I see a huge number of students that sometimes I look at and I think, I don't understand why they're special ed. I'm not getting this. I'm not seeing, what I'm being told. This sheet of paper is telling me this child is XYZ, and I don't see it. There's absolutely no reason to think that everything has to be done differently for a child, or we have to dumb it down. We just have to approach that child differently. Every kid can learn. That's a given. We're human beings. We're wired to learn. We're hurting our special needs kids by basically telling them, you can't. You're not capable of doing this.
To address this problem, DPI utilized federal funds specifically earmarked for improving services for special education students. Instead of providing additional tutoring for students or utilizing the latest technology, however, education leaders settled on a different objective: providing cultural sensitivity training for Wisconsin teachers and tackling the issue of what they refer to as white privilege. Each year, Create Wisconsin holds a conference for educators to hear speakers and receive the latest research. At Create's 2009 conference, the very first presenter, Matt Stewart, described the special education dilemma. Throughout American education today, people can hear the argument that our schools are becoming more racially segregated than they have at any other time. This is nowhere more evident than in special education. All the statistics belie the fact that there is a huge disparity in overrepresentation, misclassification, and hardship for minority students, primarily for African American and Native Americans, not only in referral to special education, but also in identification as special ed. Indeed, statistics support Mr. Stewart's initial description of the situation, but he goes further, noting that today, some are arguing that special education is being used by some to segregate students of color, and that the reality is that race is the primary factor in the disparities in referrals and assignment. He supposes this is due to bias, misconceptions, and unconscious racism. Moreover, he speculates racism and racist attitudes harbored by dominant society about Black and Hispanic students plays a major role in placement. And so the conference narrative, in its opening presentation, quickly moves from acknowledging a legitimate problem to asserting an intent to misclassify students out of a systemic, institutionalized racial animus among educators. Stewart isn't alone. An alarming number of conference speakers operated under the premise that whites are inherently biased and racist, and that the primary reason minority students are not performing as well academically is because the system as a whole is engineered to benefit whites. Laverne Jackson Harvey, who works for the Department of Public Instruction, included in her presentation, there appears to be a national trend that can be attributed to the conservative agenda that currently exists with former closet racists leaving the closet and entering the light to write policies that support covert and overt racism that impact students of color. At these CREATE conferences, there is a particularly heavy emphasis on diffusing this so-called white privilege. Radical speaker after radical speaker offer theories and solutions that affect not only what is being taught in special education classrooms, but in every classroom, influencing every student. They variously urge school employees to tackle white privilege in schools, identify who has privilege, take the cultural temperature of one's classroom, examine the dynamics of oppression and privilege, and enumerate the costs of racism to white people.
We do have numerous discussions during staff development and staff training talking about the achievement gap between our students, our minority students and our non-minority students. We talk about kind of the over-identification of our students of color specifically. There is a school of thought that believes the only way to teach a student of color is to be a teacher of color. So there's that school of thought. Another one is that, and I remember sitting in a meeting and being told that I need to own my whiteness and I need to own the fact that I have white privilege. And until I can own that and almost feel the embarrassment from it and the shame from it, only then can I start breaking, down the walls and be able to teach my students of color and to reach out to them, which of course is absolutely absurd.
Video records of these CREATE conferences are difficult to come by, but this excerpt from the 2010 CREATE keynote address by Dr. Samuel Betances offers a glimpse.
I want you to say, the Pilgrims were illegal aliens. I want you to say the Pilgrims did not give their passport to the Indians. And we consider them heroic.
CREATE Wisconsin generally only provides testimonials of conference attendees, but does not reveal the content of the conferences themselves. The thoughts and ideas of other speakers and authors of conference materials, however, can provide additional insight. One such author, Dr. Francis Kendall, claims racism, sexism, heterosexism, the institutionalized primacy of Christianity, and able-bodiedism work toward a common goal: to maintain power and control in the hands of wealthy, white, heterosexual, Christian, able-bodied men. Dr. Geneva Gay, a 2012 conference keynote speaker, said this:
"We know that social change is not something that comes about because people want to do it. There has to be some kind of mandatory kind of accountability tracking that's going on. This requires a fundamental change, and change is difficult for most of us to engage with, but yet it must be done."
It poses the question, what are these CREATE conferences truly about? Addressing problems in special education, or the fundamental transformation of American society and culture? DPI not only funds this program, but it also coordinates another entity, the Wisconsin State Human Relations Association. DPI helps to steer that organization and provided it with seed money to start the statewide Equity and Multicultural Education Conference. Jackson Harvey, the DPI employee from whom we heard earlier, is a member of the group's executive council and gave a presentation at its 2012 conference. The association recently gave its institutional award to Groundwork Madison, which it characterizes as an organization that consists of white anti-racist individuals who have come together to work against racism. This sentiment, of course, sounds noble. But according to their own newsletter, Groundwork Madison was founded in the philosophy of Stokely Carmichael, a civil rights advocate of the 1960s who claimed white people must help white people understand racism. Interestingly, the newsletter omits that Carmichael was known as the honorary prime minister of the Black Panther Party, a radical Marxist black nationalist organization. Ironically, Carmichael eventually left the Black Panthers because of its dogmatic party line favoring alliances with white radicals. This is, in fact, the literal opposite of what the association's newsletter claims. Indeed, Carmichael's racial philosophies were sufficiently extreme that he proposed executing those who did not subscribe to them.
Many of our people's minds have been whitewashed. If a Negro comes up to you and you turn your back on him, he's got to run to the honky. We're going to take time and patience with our people because they're ours. They're ours. All of the Uncle Toms, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk. And when they slap, we're going to bow. And when they slap, we're going to bow. And we're going to try to bring them home. And if they don't come home, we're going to off them. That's all. We have to recognize who our major enemy is. The major enemy is not your brother, flesh of your flesh and blood of your blood. The major enemy is the hunky and his institutions of racism. That's the major enemy. That is the major enemy.
The newsletter also fails to mention that Carmichael eventually abandoned the United States altogether, exiling himself for nearly 30 years and befriending our enemies in Cuba and Vietnam.
Fidel Castro is a man of great stature and great comprehension. A little island like Cuba. He is himself leaped beyond this island of Cuba. He is known everywhere throughout the world, and he is respected everywhere throughout the world, except by capitalist pigs. Everywhere. Vietnam defeated America. Defeated America. And I was in North Vietnam. I had one of the greatest honors of my life. I had lunch with Ho Chi Minh in North Vietnam when American planes were bombing North Vietnam. One of the greatest honors of my life. And the Vietnamese who fought America, they fought America, and every Vietnamese soldier had one bowl of rice a day. That was their ration. And they whooped America.
It is surprising, if not disturbing, that an organization inspired by such a controversial figure, an admitted racist who celebrated the deaths of Americans, would be honored by Wisconsin educators with public funds. Why would the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction indulge such a radical solution to such a critical problem? How does this agenda in any way contribute positively to special education? And whose agenda, exactly, is being implemented? One of the primary drivers behind this multicultural training is a San Francisco-based company called Pacific Educational Group. That group recently made headlines when one of its trainees raised questions about the racial implications of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, arguing that the mere mention of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches might be implicitly racist. Portland, Oregon schools paid Peg $526,901 to receive the controversial training. And that's just one school district. How much is DPI paying Peg? Peg's founder, Glenn Singleton, said this at his annual conference.
There are things that are going on now that have never gone on before. Okay, and with that comes a need for us to be able to interpret those things, particularly as they relate to how our children are educated in schools.
The activists hired by DPI want to interpret issues in a way that benefits their own radical agenda. One item on that agenda is reinterpreting the history of the United States in the worst possible way. One conference presenter, Ruth Gudinas, highly recommended books such as Columbus and Other Cannibals, A People's History of the United States by communist professor Howard Zinn, considered a propagandist by even those on the left, and The Truth About Columbus, a subversively true poster book for a dubious celebratory occasion. Create Wisconsin also tackles Thanksgiving. Elementary teachers are encouraged to conduct a simulation with young students, framing Thanksgiving as a kind of hostile invasion. And recall this moment from Create's 2010 keynote address.
I want you to say, the Pilgrims were illegal aliens. I want you to say, the Pilgrims did not give their passport to the Indians. And we consider them heroic.
Another presenter, Madison School District employee Andriel Davis, wrote that a visit to her school district by President Obama was an example of communalism. Communalism is the concept that the duty to one's family and social group is more important than the individual rights and privileges, she wrote. Is that the real goal of all of this? To move America away from individualism and individual rights, attack traditional values, and use our schools and your tax dollars to do it?
We read about every single part of this world except for America. We cover every religion except for Christianity. It is absolutely not mentioned. It is not talked about. So the idea of, teaching world literature doesn't include America. Kids no longer say the pledge. Kids are no longer taught the national anthem. That's no longer taught in schools. They understand that you start with these children very young, and if you want to create this mindset that America is a terrible place and we're responsible for all the world's woes, you start at a very young age, and that is what's happening. We're so concerned about giving every other nationality and history their due that we've actually forgotten our own, and I believe it's purposeful.
EAG sought to obtain documents from DPI related to this program and were answered with a demand for nearly $20,000 to fill the request.
We submitted an open records request to the department asking for training materials, contracts, financials, those sorts of records related to the program. And they came back to us with a bill for over $19,000. These are public records. We understand that there's a cost involved and that sort of thing, but government has the ability to make it very difficult for the public to actually see how the government is operating.
Given everything we have observed, one cannot help but wonder what the ultimate objective is at Wisconsin's Department of Public Instruction. Are they, as they claim, truly interested in better serving students with special education needs? Or have students with special needs simply been exploited to surreptitiously promote an extreme political agenda? An agenda as radical as this, one which undermines and opposes long-standing traditional American ideas, will not be willingly adopted by the majority. Indeed, and as we have already seen, even those who advocate for these ideas concede they must be forced.
We know that social change is not something that comes about because people want to do it. There has to be some kind of mandatory kind of accountability tracking that's going on. This requires a fundamental change, and change is difficult for most of us to engage with, but yet it must be done.
If you got monies that you got to spend, we have a team that can come and help you spend it.
Parents, grandparents, taxpayers, people who love America and love the fact that we're a free country, we have free markets, you can make of yourself what you want. That whole idea, I think, is being undermined by programs like this. The lineage of these ideas is through higher education. It's through ideologies that don't really have anything to do with education. What they're saying is, we need to expose the whiteness of our governmental systems. We need individuals who work for those systems to own up to their privilege that they have. That radical philosophy that, again, has nothing to do with actually trying to improve educational outcomes for students with special needs. They're using the education system and they're using the special education program as a vehicle to try and change the system, to try and change America, and are using our students to do it.
You as a parent ultimately have that decision what your child should be listening to. And so, unfortunately, parents should not be trusting. I hate to say it, but they shouldn't be trusting us as much as they do. They really need to question us and question our integrity and keep us on our toes and hold us accountable every day for what their kids are learning.